The sound of Sunday hymns filled the wooden church in Fort Garland, Colorado. But Beatrice Owens could barely hear them over the thundering of her own heartbeat as she felt dozens of eyes boring into her back. Spring had arrived in 1882, bringing warmth to the mountains and a special visitor to their small congregation, a traveling preacher who had spent the last 10 minutes of his sermon fixating on gluttony and the sins of the flesh while his gaze kept drifting pointedly in her direction. Beatrice kept her eyes fixed on her hands, folded tightly in her lap, willing herself to disappear into the hard wooden pew. At 22 years old, she had endured a lifetime of sideways glances and whispered comments about her fuller figure, but something about today felt different, felt worse. The visiting preacher's voice rose to a crescendo as he proclaimed that those who could not control their appetites were destined for eternal damnation, and she heard someone behind her whisper loudly enough for half the congregation to hear. "Well, we all know who he is talking about," came the voice of Margaret Sullivan, the banker's wife, followed by a chorus of barely suppressed giggles from her circle of friends. Beatrice's cheeks burned hot as fire. She wanted to stand up and leave, to run from this place that was supposed to offer comfort and sanctuary, but her legs felt like they were made of lead. Her mother, sitting beside her, reached over and squeezed her hand, but even that small gesture of support could not quench the shame flooding through her veins. When the service finally ended and people began filing out, Beatrice tried to slip away quickly, but Margaret Sullivan blocked her path in the aisle. Her thin lips curved into a cruel smile. "Beatrice, dear, perhaps you should have paid closer attention to today's sermon," she said, loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. "Although I suppose some people simply lack the willpower to change their ways." Several other women gathered around, their faces showing everything from pity to barely concealed contempt. Sarah Mitchell, the schoolteacher, shook her head sadly. "It is such a shame. If you would just push away from the table once in a while, Beatrice, you might actually find yourself a husband." "No man wants a wife who looks like she has eaten all the chickens meant for Sunday dinner," added Elizabeth Carson, causing another wave of laughter to ripple through the small group. Beatrice felt tears pricking at her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She had heard variations of these insults her entire life, but having them delivered here, in the house of God, with half the town as witnesses, was almost more than she could bear. Her throat constricted, making it impossible to form words in her own defense, not that anyone would have listened anyway. "Ladies, I think you have said quite enough." The voice that cut through the cruel laughter was deep and steady, carrying an unmistakable note of authority that made everyone fall silent. Beatrice looked up to see Lucas Fitzgerald standing in the aisle, his tall frame blocking the sunlight streaming through the church windows. He was a cowboy who worked on the massive Crawford Ranch just outside of town, known for his skill with horses and his quiet, solitary nature. At 26 years old, he had the weathered look of a man who spent his days under the harsh Colorado sun, with dark hair that curled slightly at his collar and eyes the color of storm clouds. Beatrice had seen him around town, but had never spoken to him directly. Men like Lucas Fitzgerald did not pay attention to women like her. Margaret Sullivan recovered from her surprise first, drawing herself up to her full height, which was still a good 6 inches shorter than Lucas. "Mr. Fitzgerald, this is a private conversation." "Private." Lucas looked around at the crowd that had gathered, his expression sardonic. "Seems pretty public to me, considering you are broadcasting your poison for the whole church to hear." "We were simply offering some friendly advice," Sarah Mitchell said, though her voice wavered slightly under Lucas's steady gaze. "Friendly." Lucas took a step forward, and several of the women actually backed away. There was nothing friendly about what I just heard. You were tearing down a good woman for no reason other than your own meanness. Elizabeth Carson lifted her chin defiantly. We were merely stating facts. Perhaps if you spent more time in town, Mr. Fitzgerald, you would understand that we are trying to help poor Beatrice. Help her. Lucas's voice rose slightly, echoing off the wooden walls of the church. By humiliating her in front of everyone. By making her feel worthless. That is your idea of help. The women exchanged glances, clearly unused to being challenged, especially by a man. Margaret Sullivan attempted to regain control of the situation. Mr. Fitzgerald, while I appreciate your gallantry, I hardly think you understand the complexities of women's concerns. We are looking out for Beatrice's best interests. Lucas turned to look directly at Beatrice, and she felt her breath catch at the intensity in his eyes. There was no pity there, no disgust, just a warm regard that made something flutter in her chest. Then he turned back to face the group of women, and when he spoke, his words rang out clear and strong. She is worth 10 of you all. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the sounds from outside seemed to fade away, leaving only those 6 words hanging in the air. Beatrice stared at Lucas, unable to believe what she had just heard. No one had ever defended her like this, had ever suggested that she had value beyond what others decided to assign her. Margaret Sullivan's face turned an unbecoming shade of red. How dare you? I will have you know that my husband is one of the most respected men in Fort Garland. When he hears about this, he will hear that his wife was being cruel to a defenseless woman in church, of all places, Lucas interrupted. And if he has any decency at all, he will be ashamed. Well, I never. Margaret sputtered, but Lucas had already turned his back on her. He extended his hand toward Beatrice. Miss Owens, may I escort you home? Beatrice hesitated, acutely aware that every eye in the church was fixed on them. Her mother gave her a gentle push forward, and she found herself placing her trembling hand in Lucas's larger, calloused one. His grip was firm and warm, and he did not let go as he led her past the gaping congregation and out into the bright Colorado sunshine. They walked in silence for several minutes, Lucas matching his longer stride to her shorter one. Beatrice kept waiting for him to say something, to explain why he had come to her defense, but he seemed content to simply walk beside her through the dusty streets of Fort Garland. The town was small, with just a few dozen buildings clustered together in the shadow of the Sangre de Cristo Mountains, their peaks still capped with snow even though spring had officially arrived. Finally, when they were well away from the church, Beatrice found her voice. You did not have to do that. Yes, I did, Lucas replied simply. But why? The question burst out of her before she could stop it. You do not even know me. Lucas paused in the middle of the street, forcing her to stop as well. He looked down at her with those serious gray eyes, and Beatrice felt heat rising to her cheeks again, though this time it was not from shame. I know enough, he said quietly. I know that you help your mother run the boarding house even though the work is hard and the hours are long. I know that you were the one who sat with old Tom Hendricks when he was dying last winter, reading to him every day because he was afraid of being alone. I know that you share your lunch with the stray dogs that hang around behind the general store, even when you probably could use that food yourself. Beatrice stared at him in astonishment. How do you know all that? A faint smile crossed Lucas's face, the first she had seen from him. I pay attention. Just because I do not spend a lot of time socializing does not mean I do not notice what happens in this town. But you have been paying attention to me. The idea seemed impossible. For about 6 months now, Lucas admitted, and now it was his turn to look slightly uncomfortable. Ever since I came into the boarding house looking for a room and your mother told me you were full up, but you offered to give me your room and sleep in the kitchen. Most people would not have done that for a stranger. Beatrice remembered that day. It had been late autumn, and Lucas had looked exhausted, covered in trail dust after driving a herd of cattle down from Wyoming. She had insisted that he take her small room because she could see how badly he needed rest. "You ended up staying at the Wilson place instead," she said. "Only because you insisted," Lucas replied. "But I never forgot that kindness, and since then I have watched you. I have seen how you treat everyone with respect, even the people who do not deserve it. I have seen you working yourself to the bone to help your mother, never complaining. And I have also seen how people in this town treat you, how they judge you based on nothing but your appearance." His words stirred something inside Beatrice, a mixture of hope and fear that she did not quite know how to process. "Most people think I am lazy, that I have no self-control." "Most people are idiots," Lucas said bluntly, earning a startled laugh from Beatrice. "Anyone with half a brain can see that you work harder than just about anyone in Fort Garland. Your worth has nothing to do with what you weigh and everything to do with who you are as a person." Tears spilled down Beatrice's cheeks before she could stop them, but these were different from the ones she had held back in the church. These tears came from a place of relief, of having someone finally see her as a complete human being rather than just a body to be criticized. Lucas looked alarmed at her tears. "I am sorry. I did not mean to upset you." "No, no," Beatrice said quickly, wiping at her face with her free hand. She realized that Lucas was still holding her other hand and that she had no desire for him to let go. "These are good tears, I promise. It is just that no one has ever said anything like that to me before." "Then the people in this town are even bigger fools than I thought," Lucas said firmly. They resumed walking, and Beatrice found herself telling Lucas things she had never shared with anyone else. She told him about growing up as the only heavy child in her class, about the endless teasing, and the way people assumed she must be sneaking food or eating in secret. She told him about the time her own cousin had made her stand on a scale at a family gathering, announcing her weight to everyone as though it were some kind of spectacle. She told him about the loneliness of watching all her friends get married one by one while she remained invisible to every eligible man in town. Lucas listened to it all without interrupting, and when she finally fell silent, he spoke with quiet intensity. "Those people who made you feel small were trying to make themselves feel big. It had nothing to do with you and everything to do with their own emptiness." "My mother says something similar," Beatrice admitted. "But it is hard to believe when you hear the same criticisms over and over." "I imagine it is," Lucas said. "But let me tell you what I see when I look at you. I see a woman with the kindest smile I have ever encountered. I see someone who lights up a room just by walking into it, not because of how she looks, but because of the warmth she brings with her. I see strength and resilience, and a capacity for love that most people will never possess." Beatrice's heart was pounding so hard she was sure Lucas must be able to hear it. "Why are you saying all this?" Lucas stopped walking again, and this time he took both of her hands in his. They were standing in front of the boarding house now, a 2-story structure that her mother had run since Beatrice's father died 5 years ago. The building needed paint, and the porch sagged slightly, but it was clean and welcoming, just like Beatrice herself. "Because I have been trying to work up the courage to speak to you for 6 months, Lucas said, his voice rough with emotion. "But every time I saw you, I froze up like a green kid at his first dance. I kept telling myself that someone like you would never be interested in a ranch hand who smells like horses and has nothing to offer but hard work and an uncertain future." "Someone like me," Beatrice repeated, confused. Someone good and decent and pure of heart, Lucas clarified. Someone who deserves far better than what I can provide. The idea that Lucas Fitzgerald, this strong, handsome man who had just faced down the most formidable women in town on her behalf, thought she was too good for him, was so absurd that Beatrice actually laughed. Lucas, I work at a boarding house. I scrub floors and wash sheets and cook meals for strangers. I am not some delicate flower. No, you are much better than that, Lucas said seriously. You are real. You are genuine. And if you would be willing to let me court you properly, I promise I will spend every day trying to prove to you how remarkable you truly are. Beatrice's mind was reeling. This morning she had dragged herself to church, dreading the usual stares and whispers. Now she was standing in the spring sunshine with a man who had just defended her honor and was asking permission to court her. It felt like a dream, and she was terrified that she would wake up and find none of it was real. I do not understand, she said softly. Why me? There are plenty of beautiful women in town who would be thrilled if you paid them attention. Lucas shook his head firmly. I have no interest in women who measure their worth by their appearance or who derive pleasure from making others feel inferior. I want someone with substance, with character. I want someone I can talk to, someone who understands hard work and values kindness over vanity. I want you, Beatrice, if you will have me. The hope that had been building in Beatrice's chest blossomed into something bigger, something that felt almost like joy. She thought about all the years she had spent feeling invisible, feeling worthless, believing that no man would ever see past her size to the person underneath. And here was Lucas Fitzgerald, telling her that he had been seeing her all along. Yes, she whispered, then more loudly. Yes, I would like that very much. The smile that spread across Lucas's face transformed him completely, erasing the serious, weathered lines and making him look years younger. He squeezed her hands gently, then seemed to realize he had been holding them for quite a while and let go, though he looked reluctant to do so. May I call on you tomorrow evening? He asked. I know Sunday afternoon is probably busy at the boarding house, but tomorrow I could bring a picnic supper and we could take a walk along the creek. That sounds wonderful, Beatrice said, still hardly believing this was happening. Lucas tipped his hat to her, a gesture that seemed both old-fashioned and charming. Until tomorrow, then, Miss Owens. Beatrice, she said impulsively. Please call me Beatrice. Beatrice, he repeated, and the way he said her name with such care and warmth made her knees feel weak. I will see you tomorrow, Beatrice. She stood on the porch and watched him walk away, his long strides carrying him back toward the edge of town, where his horse was presumably tied. Only when he had disappeared from view did she finally go inside, where she found her mother waiting with a knowing smile. Well, Martha Owens said, wiping her hands on her apron, that looked like an interesting conversation. Beatrice told her mother everything that had happened at the church and afterward, the words tumbling out in a rush. Martha listened with increasing satisfaction, nodding at intervals. That Lucas Fitzgerald is a good man, Martha said when Beatrice finally finished. I've heard nothing but positive things about him from the Crawfords. They say he is the best horseman in 3 counties and as honest as the day is long. But, Mother, what if this is just temporary? Beatrice voiced the fear that had been gnawing at her. What if he realizes he made a mistake? Martha took her daughter's face in both hands, looking at her with fierce love. Beatrice Owens, you listen to me. That man did not defend you in front of half the town on a whim. He has been watching you, really seeing you for months. He knows exactly who you are and he chose you anyway. Not despite who you are, but because of it. Do you really think so? Beatrice asked, wanting desperately to believe it. I know so, Martha said firmly. Now we have 5 boarders expecting supper in 2 hours, so we had better get to work. But tomorrow, you are taking the evening off, and I do not want to hear any arguments about it." The next day seemed to crawl by with agonizing slowness. Beatrice went through her usual tasks of preparing breakfast, changing linens, sweeping floors, and starting on the laundry, but her mind kept drifting to the evening ahead. She found herself checking her reflection in every mirror she passed, something she normally avoided, trying to see what Lucas saw when he looked at her. What she saw was a round face with dark blue eyes and brown hair that tended to escape its pins. She saw a body that had always felt too large, too much, taking up more space than the world seemed willing to give her. But she tried to view herself through Lucas's eyes, to find the kindness and warmth he claimed to see, and gradually she began to notice things she had overlooked before. Her eyes were actually quite pretty, fringed with long lashes. Her hair, while unruly, was thick and healthy, and when she smiled experimentally at her reflection, she had to admit that her smile was genuine and warm. By the time Lucas arrived that evening, carrying a basket and looking freshly washed with his dark hair still damp, Beatrice had worked herself into a state of nervous excitement. She had changed into her best dress, a deep blue cotton that her mother had helped her sew last year, and had managed to tame her hair into a neat bun. The look on Lucas's face, when he saw her, made all the effort worthwhile. "You look beautiful," he said simply, and the sincerity in his voice made her believe it might actually be true. They walked to the creek that ran along the eastern edge of town, following a path that wound through cottonwood trees just beginning to leaf out. Lucas spread a blanket on the grass near the water's edge and unpacked the basket, revealing fried chicken, biscuits, early-season strawberries, and a jar of lemonade. "Did you prepare all this yourself?" Beatrice asked, impressed. Lucas looked slightly embarrassed. "I had some help from Rosie Crawford, the cook at the ranch. I told her I wanted to make a good impression." They ate and talked as the sun slowly sank toward the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Lucas told her about his childhood in Kansas, how his parents had died in a cholera outbreak when he was 15, leaving him to fend for himself. He had worked on various ranches across the West, learning the cowboy trade and saving every penny he could. "My dream is to have my own small ranch someday," he confided. "Nothing huge, just enough land to run some cattle and breed horses. I am good with horses, and I think I could make a decent living at it." "That sounds like a wonderful dream," Beatrice said, trying to ignore the little voice in her head that whispered he would never want to share that dream with someone like her. As if reading her thoughts, Lucas reached over and took her hand. "I am not just telling you about my dreams to make conversation, Beatrice. I am telling you because I want you to know what kind of future I am working toward. I am not a wealthy man, and I probably never will be, but I am a hard worker and I can provide for a family." The word family hung in the air between them, full of implication and possibility. Beatrice felt her pulse quicken. "Lucas, we have only just started courting." "I know," he said, "and I do not mean to rush you or make you uncomfortable, but I believe in being honest about my intentions. I am not courting you just to pass the time, Beatrice. I am courting you because I believe you could be the person I spend the rest of my life with." His words were so direct, so sincere, that Beatrice felt tears threatening again. "I feel like I am going to wake up and discover this was all a dream." "It is not a dream," Lucas assured her. "I am real, and this is real, and what I feel for you is very, very real." As the stars began to appear overhead, Lucas walked Beatrice back to the boarding house. At the front door, he hesitated, then gently lifted her hand to his lips and kissed it. The gesture was old-fashioned and courtly, and it made Beatrice feel like the heroine in one of the romance novels she sometimes read by candlelight after everyone else had gone to bed. "May I see you again on Thursday?" Lucas asked. "I have to work late the next few days, but Thursday afternoon I could take you for a buggy ride if you would like." "I would like that very much," Beatrice replied. Over the following weeks, Lucas and Beatrice fell into a pattern of regular meetings. True to his word, Lucas courted her properly, always respectful, always considerate of her feelings and her reputation. He showed up when he said he would, brought her small gifts like wildflowers or interesting rocks he had found on the range, and most importantly, he listened when she talked, truly listened, as though every word she spoke was important. The people of Fort Garland watched this courtship with varying degrees of surprise and speculation. Margaret Sullivan and her circle of friends were notably silent on the subject, perhaps remembering Lucas's defense of Beatrice in the church. Other townspeople seemed genuinely happy for Beatrice, while some clearly could not understand what Lucas saw in her. Beatrice tried not to pay attention to the whispers and stares. For the first time in her life, she had something precious to protect, a relationship that made her feel valued and cherished. Lucas never acted ashamed to be seen with her, never made comments about her appearance or suggested she needed to change. He accepted her exactly as she was, and gradually, Beatrice began to accept herself as well. One Saturday in early summer, Lucas invited Beatrice to visit the Crawford ranch where he worked. He wanted to show her the horses he had been training, and he also wanted her to meet the Crawford family, who had become almost like family to him. The ranch was sprawling and impressive, with a large main house, several barns, and endless miles of fenced pasture where cattle and horses grazed. Lucas gave Beatrice a tour, pointing out various buildings and introducing her to other ranch hands who all seemed to respect him greatly. But it was when they reached the training corral that Lucas truly came alive. He showed Beatrice a young mare he had been working with, a beautiful chestnut with a white blaze on her face. The horse had been wild and unmanageable when Lucas started with her, but now she responded to his slightest command, moving with grace and trust. "She is magnificent," Beatrice breathed, watching Lucas work with the mare. "Her name is Sunrise," Lucas said, bringing the horse over to the fence where Beatrice stood. "Would you like to pet her?" Beatrice reached out tentatively and stroked the mare's soft nose. Sunrise whickered softly and pushed her head against Beatrice's hand, clearly enjoying the attention. "She likes you," Lucas observed with pleasure. "Horses are good judges of character, and Sunrise is particularly picky about who she allows near her. Mrs. Crawford, a warm-hearted woman in her 50s, invited them to stay for lunch. Over a meal of beef stew and cornbread, she told Beatrice stories about Lucas's work on the ranch, making it clear how much they valued him. "We have been trying to convince Lucas to stay on permanently," Mr. Crawford said, a gruff man with kind eyes. "He is the best horseman we have ever had, and we would like to offer him a partnership in the horse breeding side of the operation." Beatrice looked at Lucas in surprise. This was far more than just a job offer. It was an opportunity for real security and advancement. Lucas met her eyes across the table. "I have been considering it," he said carefully, "but there are other factors I need to think about before I make such a big decision." Later, when they were alone again, Lucas explained what he had meant. They were sitting under a large oak tree, watching the sun begin its descent toward the mountains, when he took both her hands in his. "The reason I have not accepted the Crawfords' offer yet is because I wanted to talk to you first," he said. "If I accept, it means staying in Fort Garland permanently. It means putting down roots here, and I need to know if that is something you could see yourself wanting to." Beatrice's heart was racing. "Lucas, are you asking what I think you are asking?" "I am not proposing yet," Lucas said, though the way he was looking at her suggested that day might not be far off. "But I am telling you that my future plans include you if you want to be included. I do not want to make a decision about where I live and work without knowing how you feel about staying in Fort Garland." "My mother and I have the boarding house here," Beatrice said slowly. "I have thought about moving somewhere else, somewhere I could start fresh where people did not know me, but I could never leave my mother to run the boarding house alone." "What if you did not have to?" Lucas asked. "What if there was another option?" "What do you mean?" Lucas took a deep breath, as though he was about to take a leap off a cliff. "What if you married me, and we helped your mother run the boarding house together while I also worked for the Crawfords? We could live at the boarding house, and I could contribute my earnings to help make improvements. Eventually, maybe we could even expand, turn it into a real hotel. Your mother would have help, you would have security, and we would have a future together." The picture Lucas painted was so vivid, so real that Beatrice could almost see it. She imagined waking up next to Lucas every morning, working alongside him to build something lasting, creating a life together that was grounded in partnership and mutual respect. "And when my mother is ready to retire, we could buy her out and own the business ourselves," Beatrice said, getting caught up in the vision. "We could hire help, maybe even add a restaurant for non-boarders." "Exactly," Lucas said, his face lighting up with enthusiasm. "And with the money from my partnership with the Crawfords, we would have enough to make real improvements to turn the boarding house into something special." "It is a wonderful dream," Beatrice said softly. "But Lucas, are you absolutely certain this is what you want? Are you certain that you want me?" Lucas released her hands only so he could cup her face gently, forcing her to meet his eyes. "Beatrice Owens, I have never been more certain of anything in my entire life. I love you, not because of what you can do for me or despite some perceived flaw. I love you because of who you are, all of you, completely and without reservation." It was the first time he had said those 3 words, and they hit Beatrice with the force of a flash flood. "You love me," she whispered. "I love you," Lucas confirmed. "I think I have loved you since the day you offered me your room at the boarding house, but I definitely knew it the day I stood up in that church and told those cruel women you were worth 10 of them. Because you are, Beatrice. You are worth 100 of them, 1,000. "I love you too," Beatrice said, and saying the words out loud made them feel more real than anything else in her life. "I think I started falling in love with you the moment you defended me, but I was too afraid to believe it could be real." Lucas smiled, that rare, beautiful smile that transformed his entire face. "It is real, Beatrice. This is real, and I am not going anywhere." He kissed her then, softly and sweetly, and Beatrice felt like she was floating. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were grinning like fools. "So I should accept the Crawfords' offer then?" Lucas asked. "Yes," Beatrice said firmly. "And then you should come talk to my mother about your plans for the boarding house." "Our plans," Lucas corrected. "This is a partnership, remember? Your ideas are just as important as mine." That simple acknowledgement, that her thoughts and opinions mattered equally to his, meant more to Beatrice than Lucas might ever know. She had spent so much of her life being dismissed and overlooked that having someone actively seek her input felt revolutionary. Martha Owens was thrilled with Lucas's proposal, both the business aspect and the personal one. "I have been hoping you two would figure out you belong together," she told them over tea in the boarding house kitchen. "And I would be honored to have you as a son, Lucas. You have proven yourself to be a man of character and integrity." Lucas accepted the partnership with the Crawfords, and in August, on a perfect summer day with wildflowers blooming across the meadows, he formally proposed to Beatrice. He took her back to the spot by the creek where they had shared their first picnic, and he got down on one knee with a simple gold band that had belonged to his grandmother. "Beatrice Owens, you have made me happier in the past few months than I have been in my entire life," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Would you do me the extraordinary honor of becoming my wife?" "Yes," Beatrice said through tears of joy. "Yes, yes, 1,000 times yes." They married in September, in the same church where Lucas had defended her 6 months earlier. This time, when Beatrice walked down the aisle, it was not to whispers of judgment but to smiles and genuine good wishes. Margaret Sullivan and her friends attended, looking somewhat sour but keeping their thoughts to themselves. Beatrice did not care. Let them think what they wanted. She had found something they might never have: true, unconditional love. The ceremony was simple but beautiful, with wildflowers decorating the church, and Beatrice wearing a cream-colored dress that Martha had sewn with loving care. When Lucas said his vows, promising to love and cherish her for all the days of their lives, Beatrice believed him completely. Their wedding night was spent in the small room at the boarding house that had been Lucas's when he first arrived in Fort Garland, and that was now theirs as a married couple. Lucas was gentle and patient, making sure Beatrice felt safe and cherished. When she expressed anxiety about her body, he kissed her tears away and told her she was perfect exactly as she was. "You are my wife," he said firmly, "and you are the most beautiful woman in the world to me." Life settled into a comfortable rhythm after the wedding. Lucas divided his time between the Crawford Ranch and the boarding house, and together he and Beatrice began implementing improvements. They painted the exterior, fixed the sagging porch, and added new furniture to the common areas. Word spread that the boarding house was under new management, and business picked up. Martha gradually stepped back from the daily operations, content to help with cooking and cleaning, while Lucas and Beatrice handled the financial and administrative side. They hired a local girl named Jenny to help with the heavier work, which meant Beatrice did not have to exhaust herself quite so much. The first winter of their marriage brought challenges. Snow piled high in Fort Garland, and several times Lucas had to stay at the ranch for days because the roads were impassable. Beatrice missed him desperately during those separations, but when he finally made it home, their reunions were all the sweeter. In the spring, Beatrice discovered she was pregnant. She was terrified to tell Lucas, afraid that he would worry about her health or the risks of childbirth for a woman of her size. But when she finally gathered the courage to share the news, Lucas picked her up and spun her around despite her protests that she was too heavy. "We are going to have a baby," he said, his voice full of wonder. "Beatrice, we are going to be parents. Are you happy?" She asked, needing to hear him say it. "Happy does not even begin to cover it," Lucas replied. "This is everything I have ever wanted. A wife I love more than life itself, a home, a future, and now a child. How could I be anything but overjoyed?" The pregnancy was not easy. Beatrice suffered from morning sickness that lasted well past the first few months, and as her belly grew, she found it increasingly difficult to move around. Lucas was endlessly patient, taking on more of her duties at the boarding house and making sure she rested as much as possible. Dr. Harrison, the town doctor, monitored Beatrice's pregnancy closely. He was honest with them about the potential risks but also reassuring about her overall health. "You are a strong woman, Mrs. Fitzgerald," he told her. "I have delivered plenty of healthy babies from mothers of all shapes and sizes. Just take care of yourself and do not overdo it." In late autumn, after a labor that lasted nearly 20 hours, Beatrice gave birth to a healthy baby boy. They named him Matthew, and Lucas cried when he held his son for the first time, tears of pure joy streaming down his weathered cheeks. "He is perfect," Lucas whispered, staring down at the tiny face. "Beatrice, he is absolutely perfect." "He has your eyes," Beatrice said weakly, exhausted but happier than she had ever been. Matthew was a healthy, vocal baby who demanded attention at all hours. Lucas proved to be a devoted father, getting up for nighttime feedings and diaper changes without complaint. He would walk Matthew around the boarding house in the wee hours, singing cowboy songs in a surprisingly pleasant voice to soothe the fussy infant. As Matthew grew, he became the darling of the boarding house. The regular boarders doted on him, and guests loved seeing a baby around. Beatrice worried sometimes that she was not a good enough mother, that her size made it harder to care for Matthew properly, but Lucas always reassured her. "You are an amazing mother," he would tell her. "Look at how happy and healthy our son is. Look at how he lights up when you walk into the room. That is not because of what you weigh, Beatrice. That is because he loves you and he knows you love him." When Matthew was 2 years old, Beatrice became pregnant again. This time the pregnancy was easier, perhaps because she knew what to expect. She gave birth to a daughter they named Rose, who had Beatrice's dark blue eyes and Lucas's dark hair. Lucas was just as besotted with his daughter as he had been with his son. He would hold Rose for hours, marveling at her tiny fingers and toes, singing the same cowboy songs that had soothed Matthew. The boarding house continued to prosper. In 1887, they had saved enough money to add a small restaurant on the first floor, just as they had dreamed. Beatrice hired a talented cook named Mrs. Chen, a Chinese immigrant whose husband had died in the mines, and together they created a menu that drew people from neighboring towns. Lucas's work with the Crawford Ranch was also going exceptionally well. His horse breeding program had produced several exceptional animals that sold for premium prices, and his partnership share increased accordingly. He was able to contribute substantially to the family finances while still being present for his wife and children. One Sunday, 5 years after that fateful day when Lucas had first defended her, Beatrice found herself back in the same church, sitting in the same pew. But everything else had changed. She sat between Lucas and Matthew, with Rose sleeping peacefully in her arms. She wore a new dress that Lucas had insisted on buying her, and her hair was arranged in the fashionable style that Jenny had helped her learn. But more importantly, she sat with her head held high, confident in who she was and what she had accomplished. She and Lucas had built a successful business together. They had 2 beautiful, healthy children. They had a partnership based on mutual respect and deep love. Margaret Sullivan and her friends were there too, but they no longer bothered Beatrice. In fact, over the years, several of them had actually apologized for their behavior that day. Margaret herself had approached Beatrice at the general store just a few months ago and admitted that she had been wrong. "You and Mr. Fitzgerald have built something admirable," Margaret had said stiffly. "And I was wrong to judge you so harshly. I hope you can forgive me." Beatrice had accepted the apology graciously, though she never forgot how those women had made her feel. But she had learned that holding on to bitterness would only hurt herself, so she chose forgiveness instead. After the service, the Fitzgerald family walked home together through streets Beatrice knew like the back of her hand. Fort Garland had grown over the years, with new families moving in and new businesses opening. The boarding house, now officially called the Fitzgerald Hotel and Restaurant, was one of the most successful establishments in town. Matthew ran ahead, chasing a butterfly while Lucas carried Rose on his shoulders. Beatrice walked beside her husband, and he reached over to take her free hand, lacing their fingers together. "What are you thinking about?" Lucas asked, noticing the pensive expression on her face. I am thinking about how different my life is from what I expected it to be, Beatrice said honestly. 5 years ago, I thought I would spend my whole life alone, helping my mother at the boarding house, watching other people live their dreams while I remained on the sidelines. And now, Lucas prompted, now I have everything I ever wanted and so much more than I thought was possible, Beatrice said. I have a husband who loves me, children who fill my days with joy, a successful business, and a place in this community. I have a life that feels full and rich and meaningful. Lucas stopped walking and turned to face her fully. Rose giggled on his shoulders, patting his head with her chubby hands. You deserve all of it, Beatrice. You deserve every bit of happiness that has come to you and more besides. We built this together, Beatrice corrected. I could not have done any of this without you. And I could not have done it without you, Lucas replied. We are a team, remember? Equal partners. Matthew came running back to them, holding the butterfly he had been chasing cupped carefully in his hands. Look, Mama, I caught it. That is wonderful, sweetheart, Beatrice said, bending down to admire his prize. But remember, butterflies need to fly. You can look at it for a moment, but then you need to let it go. Matthew nodded seriously and opened his hands. The butterfly sat there for a moment, as if considering, then spread its wings and took flight, soaring up into the clear Colorado sky. Will it come back? Matthew asked, watching it disappear. It might, Lucas said, hoisting Rose more securely onto his shoulders. Or it might go somewhere new, somewhere it has never been before. That is the nature of butterflies. They go where they need to go. But we are not like butterflies, are we, Papa? Matthew asked. We are staying here. We are staying right here, Lucas confirmed, exchanging a warm glance with Beatrice. This is our home, and we are not going anywhere. That evening, after the children were tucked into bed and Martha had retired to her own room, Lucas and Beatrice sat together on the front porch of the boarding house, which they had expanded into a proper hotel. The sun was setting behind the mountains, painting the sky in brilliant shades of purple and gold. You ever regret it? Beatrice asked suddenly. Tying yourself to me, to this place when you could have had adventures, seen more of the world, Lucas turned to her with surprise. Where is this coming from? I do not know, Beatrice admitted. I suppose sometimes I still cannot quite believe that you chose me, that you continue to choose me every day. Lucas took her hand and brought it to his lips, just as he had on their first evening together. Beatrice, you are not something I settled for. You are not second best or a compromise. You are the best thing that ever happened to me. You are my partner, my love, my best friend. You are the mother of my children and the person I want beside me for every day I have left on this earth. Even though I am not like those other women, Beatrice asked, voicing the insecurity that still sometimes plagued her. The thin, beautiful ones who would have been easier for you. Easier, Lucas actually laughed. Beatrice, love is not supposed to be easy, it is supposed to be worth it. And you are worth everything. Besides, you are beautiful. You have always been beautiful to me. But more than that, you are good and kind and strong. You are brave and clever and caring. You are everything I could have hoped for in a wife and more than I thought I deserved. Beatrice felt tears pricking at her eyes, but these were good tears, the kind that came from being overwhelmed by happiness. I love you so much, Lucas Fitzgerald. And I love you, Beatrice Fitzgerald, he replied. More today than yesterday and less than tomorrow. They sat together in comfortable silence, watching the stars emerge one by one in the darkening sky. From inside the hotel, they could hear the murmur of voices as their guests gathered in the common room, the clink of dishes from the restaurant, the normal sounds of their thriving business. This was their life, built from nothing but determination and love. It was not a fairy tale. They still had hard days and challenges to overcome. The business required constant attention, the children were demanding, and there were still people in town who looked at Beatrice with judgment in their eyes. But none of that mattered because they had each other. They had built something real and lasting, a partnership that went beyond romance into true companionship. They were raising their children with love and teaching them that a person's worth had nothing to do with their appearance and everything to do with their character. Over the following years, the Fitzgerald Hotel continued to grow and prosper. They added more rooms, expanded the restaurant, and even installed one of the first bathtubs in Fort Garland, which became a major selling point for travelers. Lucas's horse breeding program with the Crawfords became renowned throughout Colorado, and several of his horses won prizes at the Denver Stock Show. Matthew and Rose grew into happy, confident children who adored their parents and had inherited the best qualities of both. Matthew had his father's way with animals and his mother's kind heart. Rose had her mother's warm smile and her father's determination. In 1892, Beatrice gave birth to their third child, another boy they named Thomas after Lucas's father. Thomas was a quieter child than his siblings, thoughtful and observant, and he seemed to have a natural talent for numbers that made Lucas predict he would take over the business side of the hotel someday. Martha Owens lived to see all three of her grandchildren born, remaining active and involved in their lives, until she passed away peacefully in her sleep in 1894 at the age of 68. Her death was hard on Beatrice, but she took comfort in knowing that her mother had lived to see her happy, that Martha had gotten to know and love Lucas, and that she had been surrounded by family who cherished her. They buried Martha in the Fort Garland cemetery on a hill overlooking the town, and Lucas held Beatrice as she cried, just as he had held her through every difficult moment of their lives together. "She was so proud of you," Lucas murmured into Beatrice's hair. "She told me once that watching you bloom into the woman you were meant to be was the greatest joy of her life." "I could not have done it without her," Beatrice said. "She never stopped believing in me, even when I did not believe in myself." "She gave you the foundation," Lucas said. "But you did the work, Beatrice. You are the one who chose to be strong, to be kind despite how people treated you, to build a life worth living." As the years passed, the memory of that day in church faded but never entirely disappeared. It had been a turning point, a moment when everything changed. Sometimes Beatrice thought about the woman she had been before Lucas stood up for her, the woman who had been so beaten down by the world that she could barely lift her head. That woman seemed like a stranger now. The Beatrice of today walked with confidence, ran a successful business, raised 3 wonderful children, and enjoyed a marriage that was the envy of many in Fort Garland. She had learned that her worth was not determined by what others thought of her, but by how she chose to live her life. The boarding house that had once been a struggling enterprise now employed 8 people and was booked solid months in advance. The restaurant had become a destination in its own right, with Mrs. Chen's cooking drawing people from as far away as Denver. The Fitzgeralds were respected members of the community, active in church and civic affairs. Lucas never lost his love for horses and continued working with the Crawfords even as his own family responsibilities grew. He taught all 3 of his children to ride, and many evenings would find the whole family at the ranch, watching Lucas work with the horses or helping with various tasks. In 1898, when Matthew was 12, Rose was 10, and Thomas was 6, the family took their first real vacation. They traveled to Denver, where the children saw a city for the first time and marveled at the tall buildings and busy streets. But what Beatrice remembered most about that trip was the evening she and Lucas snuck away from the children, who were being watched by a trusted friend, and had dinner at a fancy restaurant. They dressed in their finest clothes, Lucas in a new suit and Beatrice in a beautiful emerald green dress that Lucas had commissioned specially for the trip. When they walked into the restaurant, Beatrice felt the familiar flutter of anxiety, waiting for stares and whispers. But Lucas simply took her arm proudly and followed the waiter to their table as though they belonged there, because they did. And as they sat across from each other, eating food they could not identify and laughing at their attempts to appear sophisticated, Beatrice realized that she had finally, truly internalized what Lucas had been telling her for years. She belonged anywhere she chose to be. Her size did not define her worth. She was valuable because of who she was as a person, not what she looked like. "What are you smiling about?" Lucas asked, reaching across the table to take her hand. "I am just happy," Beatrice said simply. "Happier than I ever imagined being." "Good," Lucas said, squeezing her hand. "Because you deserve to be happy, Beatrice. You deserve every good thing this world has to offer." They returned to Fort Garland refreshed and full of new ideas for the hotel. The children talked endlessly about their adventures in the big city, and for months afterward, Rose insisted on trying to recreate the fancy dishes they had eaten in Denver, much to Mrs. Chen's amusement. As the century turned and a new era began, the Fitzgerald family continued to thrive. Matthew showed an interest in following his father into the horse business, while Rose surprised everyone by announcing she wanted to study to become a teacher. Thomas, true to Lucas's prediction, had a head for numbers and began helping with the hotel accounts when he was barely in his teens. In 1902, 20 years after that fateful day in church, the town of Fort Garland held a celebration for the Fitzgeralds, recognizing their contributions to the community. The hotel had become the largest employer in town, and Lucas's horses had brought recognition to Fort Garland throughout the state. Standing before the assembled townspeople, with Lucas beside her and their children watching proudly, Beatrice gave a short speech. She talked about the importance of community, of treating everyone with dignity and respect, of looking beyond surface appearances to see the true value in people. And as she spoke, her eyes found Margaret Sullivan in the crowd. The older woman looked back at her, and there was something like respect in her expression. They would never be friends, Beatrice and Margaret, but they had reached an understanding over the years. People could change, could grow, could learn from their mistakes. After the celebration, as the family walked home through streets Beatrice had walked countless times before, Lucas slipped his arm around her waist. "That was a good speech," he said. "I meant every word," Beatrice replied. "I know you did," Lucas said. "That is one of the many reasons I love you." Matthew, now a young man of 20, walked with his arm around Rose's shoulders. The two of them engaged in some sibling argument that made Thomas roll his eyes in exasperation. Watching them, Beatrice felt her heart swell with love and pride. This was her life. This was what she had built, what she and Lucas had created together. It had started with one moment of courage, one man standing up and declaring her worth when she could not do it for herself. But it had grown into something so much bigger, so much more meaningful. "Lucas," she said softly, stopping in the middle of the street and turning to face her husband. "Thank you." "For what?" he asked, though there was a knowing look in his eyes. "For seeing me when I was invisible. For standing up for me when I could not stand up for myself. For loving me when I did not know how to love myself. For building this life with me." Lucas cupped her face in his hands, the same gesture he had made so many times over their years together. "Beatrice Fitzgerald, you never have to thank me for loving you. Loving you is the easiest, most natural thing I have ever done. You are my heart, my home, my everything." He kissed her then, right there in the middle of the street with their children watching and probably groaning in embarrassment. But Beatrice did not care. She kissed her husband back with all the love and passion and gratitude she felt, pouring 20 years of happiness into that single moment. When they finally pulled apart, Matthew was indeed looking embarrassed, Rose was grinning, and Thomas was pretending to be very interested in something in the opposite direction. "Come on," Lucas said, taking Beatrice's hand. "Let us go home." Home. Such a simple word, but it meant everything. Home was not just the hotel they owned or the town where they lived. Home was wherever they were together, Lucas and Beatrice, partners in every sense of the word, building a life based on love and respect and unwavering faith in each other. As they walked through the door of the Fitzgerald Hotel, greeted by the familiar sounds and smells of their business, their life, their legacy, Beatrice said a silent prayer of gratitude. She was grateful for that day 20 years ago when Lucas Fitzgerald had stood up in church and changed her life forever. She was grateful for every day since, for every challenge overcome and every joy celebrated. But most of all, she was grateful for the man walking beside her, the man who had seen her worth when no one else could, the man who had declared her value to the world and then spent every day since proving it to her. Lucas Fitzgerald had not just saved her that day in church. He had helped her save herself, had given her the courage to claim the life she deserved. And now, 2 decades later, with their children grown and their business thriving and their love as strong as ever, Beatrice could finally say with absolute certainty that she knew her own worth. She was valuable, not because Lucas said so, but because she chose to believe it. She was worthy of love and respect and happiness, not despite her size, but because worth had nothing to do with appearance. She was Beatrice Fitzgerald, wife, mother, businesswoman, and beloved member of the Fort Garland community. She was strong and capable and loved beyond measure, and she was exactly who she was meant to be. That night, long after the children had gone to bed and the hotel had settled into quiet, Lucas and Beatrice sat together in their private sitting room, a small space they had carved out for themselves on the second floor. Lucas was reading the newspaper while Beatrice worked on embroidering a sampler for Rose, who would be leaving for teachers' college in the fall. "You ever wonder what would have happened if that day in church had gone differently?" Beatrice asked suddenly. Lucas looked up from his newspaper, considering the question. "You mean if I had not said anything?" "Yes, if you had just let them say those cruel things and stayed silent like everyone else." Lucas set down his newspaper and moved to sit beside Beatrice on the small sofa. "I do not have to wonder, because I know exactly what would have happened. I would have gone home that day hating myself for being a coward. I would have spent the rest of my life regretting that I did not speak up when I had the chance, and I would have missed out on the greatest love of my life." "You cannot know that for certain," Beatrice said, though she was smiling. "Yes, I can," Lucas insisted. "Because even if I had been too afraid to defend you that day, I still would have been in love with you, and eventually I would have found the courage to tell you. It might have taken longer and the path might have been different, but we would have ended up here anyway. We were meant to find each other, Beatrice." "You really believe that?" Beatrice asked. "I know it," Lucas said with absolute certainty. "Some things are just meant to be, and you and me, we are one of those things." Beatrice set aside her embroidery and leaned against her husband's solid, reassuring presence. After 20 years, he could still make her heart flutter with a look or a touch. After 20 years, she still marveled that this good man had chosen her and continued choosing her every single day. "I love you, Lucas Fitzgerald," she whispered. "And I love you, Beatrice Fitzgerald," he replied. "Always and forever." Outside, the Colorado night was clear and star-filled. the same sky that had witnessed the beginning of their story and would continue to watch over them for all the years to come. Inside the Fitzgerald Hotel, all was peaceful and prosperous, a testament to what two people could build when they refused to let the world define them. Beatrice closed her eyes and let herself sink into this moment, this perfect, ordinary evening with the man she loved. This was happiness, she thought. Not some grand, dramatic gesture, but this quiet contentment, this bone-deep certainty that she was exactly where she belonged. 20 years ago, she had been a woman who did not know her own worth, who had let other people's cruelty make her feel small and insignificant. But Lucas had seen something in her that she could not see in herself, and he had been brave enough to say it out loud. He had declared her value to the world, and in doing so, he had given her permission to claim it for herself. She was worth 10 of them, he had said. And now, finally, after years of growth and healing and building a life worth living, Beatrice believed it. She knew her worth, and it had nothing to do with the numbers on a scale and everything to do with the kindness in her heart, the strength in her spirit, and the love she shared so freely with everyone around her. This was her happily ever after, not because some prince had rescued her, but because she had found a partner who believed in her enough to help her rescue herself. This was her story, her life, her triumph. And it was more beautiful than anything she could have imagined on that terrible, wonderful day when everything changed. The end.